All right, rugged communitarian, are you there?
Hello.
Yeah, I hear you.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going well.
I just want to say I've been enjoying your conversation so far.
I appreciate it. It's kind of an impromptu thing. There wasn't really like a topic in mind, so I kind of just went like chatting versus AMA or whatever. So I mean, you seemed like you really wanted to hop in, so I was like, "Fuck it, I'll talk. I got time."
Well, I have criticisms of like libertarian political philosophy that I would like to get your thoughts on, like or certain notions that I've come across from studying libertarian political philosophy. But I do also have some comments about like the topic you were just discussing. If you would also like to hear my thoughts on it.
Yeah, I mean, well, while we get to first, hold on, pause. It's my show. First, who are you? Do you want to be found anywhere? And if not, that's fine too. But shout yourself out or whatever if you have any socials, and then I guess we can continue on the same topic, just to naturally flow, so we get to know a little bit of who you are, and then we can get into your other questions.
I understand. Well, I plan on producing like high quality videos on politics in the future, but at the present moment I don't have any plans to. But I just was interested in talking, just speaking with you. That's really why I joined that, and there was some thoughts I had about libertarianism. I wanted to ask from a libertarian, so I thought it would be good to hear what you had to say. So there's two myths I believe that I've come across in libertarianism, right? There's one where there's the belief that the state and any form of government or any form of state inherently leads to continuous growth in size, power, and reach, right? There's some libertarians who maintain that. Well, do you agree with that notion?
Well, so I don't want to be too nitpicky, right? But you said the state and or any government,
and any form of like government, as in like the common use, like I guess like the phrase people like to use is monopoly of force. I guess.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Yeah. That's the distinct factor here, right? So yes, I would agree with the concept that if you have a monopoly on the power, on the usage of force, that there is that the incentive structure is such that over time you are always going to see, you're almost always going to see an increase in the size and scope of that state. There may be periods of time where this is not true. There may even be periods of time where the opposite is true. But the incentive structure is there to massively in one direction. And as Charles said from Berkshire Hathaway, I can't remember his last name right now, but he had a famous quote from Berkshire Hathaway: "Show me the incentives and I'll show you the outcome." Right? So okay. I do agree that it is fallacious to say that any government or any state will always head in one direction. It's impossible for it to ever head in the other direction. Is fallacious, but the incentives are all there for that to go. And I think given enough time, if the incentives all head in one direction massively, like that's almost always what's going to happen.
I understand. But I disagree, and I have a response. But I just want to know what your position was on that. But my second question is about Do you believe that? I'll address both, but I have a second question. I'll address both of your responses, but let me ask the second question. The second question is: do you believe that there can never be a voluntary consent when it comes to forming a state or government, like a state monopoly of force? Do you think that can never happen because of like spontaneous order or some type of like voluntary consent?
What do you mean? like I don't like I'm not I'm is it you're asking, is it impossible that some group of people voluntarily give up a monopoly towards an entity to commit violence? Is that what you're saying?
Well, it's you're saying to commit violence, but would you even I mean, would you consider it violence though? Really? Because we can agree on like contracts, right? The legitimacy of contracts.
Yeah.
So
I'm just trying to figure out what you're asking, not to be nitpicked on the usage of the word violence, right? Like what you're saying is it impossible for a covenant community to exist where, let's say, 100 people get together and they all agree to a contract that says everyone in this community is going to live within these borders of a plot of land, and we're all going to agree that company A are the cops, and that there's not going to be a competition of company A with company B because we all signed this contract volunteering together that company A will be the cops within this section. No, I don't think that's impossible or anti-libertarian.
Is voting like a form of like participation that could be like compared to a contract?
No, voting and the contract are not the same. You can have a contract where voting based upon your shares in an entity or based upon the contract with like rules and system is like you can have voting, and but that has to be a part of a contract. Contract always supersedes voting because like a majority will doesn't overwrite a contract between voluntary individuals.
I don't believe in like a social contract or natural rights or human rights. I believe in there's something I'm looking into right now. It's a form of view. It's called common law conservatism, but that's beyond. That's besides the point. Basically, so my responses to or my justifications for why both of both of those notions are myths, right? Is because they're both actually refuted by libertarians themselves. To address the first point about you said that you do believe that the state would eventually, because of its incentives, it would eventually grow, like grow in size and power, right? So there's this book. It's called Chaining Down Leviathan by Luigi Marco Bassani. He gave a lecture, I believe, on this book on the YouTube channel. I can't remember the exact name. I think it's called like Property Society. Hop gave a lecture, gave some lectures on the channel before.
You're bouncing all over the place. I'm trying to.
No. It's relevant.
Yes, you. Hold on. Relax. Relax. I will mute you. I will. Listen. Hold on. Rugged. Relax. So, you presumably have some form of critique here that you would like to make. So I would like to hear the argument for the critique and what the critique is. Right now, you're saying, "Well, I'm looking into this philosophy. I'm listening to these people, etc." Like, it's okay. Just hear me out. Just is there a critique that you have that you wanted to bring to my attention and that you wanted my opinion on? And if so, what is that critique and why do you believe that critique is valid?
Yeah, so I have two. So the first one that I was trying to get to is Leviathan. I've known about this book for a while, but I've been looking more into it recently. And basically, in the book, like I came across the argument that I'm looking for the exact page, but okay, I found it. Okay, so it basically in this book it argues that
are you talking about the Leviathan, like before John Locke's response, Second Treatise on Government?
No. It's a modern book by a modern scholar. Basically the American political system we have now is not the same as our core political system. I think we might be able to agree on that. But what some people might not understand is that from what I've been reading from this book is that after the Civil War with Abraham Lincoln, there was actually a new American political system formed, right? Because the South went through a completely legitimate political process when they were trying to secede, right? And like it was completely constitutional, right? Even Thomas Jefferson predicted that the American political system would break up into three. That it would become more regional. Right?
Okay.
But well, hold on, I just want.
You keep telling me to hold on. You have yet to get to a critique.
So with the core American political system, this book makes a claim that and points to the evidence that in the 1800s up until the 1860s, it says the states were equally frugal with taxes and debt, and as of 1860, the central government had actually diminished in size. So by the 1860, before the Civil War, the central government had actually diminished in size. The opposite of continues of progressively growing.
Yeah. So hold on. So we got to your claim. Your claim is.
And then the follow up.
Hold on. No. Hold on.
This is not.
Hold on. No, dude. I will mute you. Hush.
It's relevant.
Hold on. Relevant. I know it's relevant. Let me listen for a second. So your claim, you initially asked me. You said, do I believe that the state over time, that the state will always grow? And I said, under most circumstances, the state continues to grow in power. That there are periods of time where the state might decrease in power, but that the overall trend is to grow in power because that is the way in which the incentives are.
Yeah,
you said a lot,
and I'm disagreeing with that.
You said a lot.
I'm disagreeing with that.
Motherfucker, relax. You said a lot, and you said the first claim is during the lead up to the Civil War in the early 1800s up to the 1860s, the federal government was reducing in size and scope before the Civil War. And that's your claim.
Yes.
I completely disagree with that claim. I think it's completely ahistorical.
Okay, and there's more to it, right? Like there was also zero federal inland taxes and zero debt at a certain point, right? It says by the 1830s the federal government was free of debt and pretty much remained so until the Civil War. But the point is this. The point is this though. You said there's incentives, but this is why I explicitly said any form of government or state or monopoly of violence. Do you believe that? And you were saying ultimately yes, because there's always going to be these negative incentives with the state, right? And I'm saying that's not true. There is a political system, and it's not theoretical. It's actually historical. It's actually before the American political system before the Civil War. And that's why I was trying to read this. I was trying to read the sentence. It says here.
My God.
Just let me finish.
The Civil War happened.
Just
though.
Let me just to finish.
Like the evidence that system, right, was dysgenic, is the Civil War, right? Like that's the power balance. Because the balance of power leading up to the Civil War was one that was based upon a constitutional republic. The constitutional republic, kind of playing off of Plato's republic, balanced all of the presumed aspects of democracy, of successful governments before it, right? So the monarchy was represented in the presidency. The aristocracy was represented in a Senate that was elected by the states, not by people, to represent the state's interests. And the House of the House of Commons, kind of like brought over in the House in America, is the population as a whole. And the issue that leads up to, one of many issues that leads up to the Civil War, is that as the South does not grow in population because of its stunted economic model, and because of its differences in culture, and because of an aristocracy that was bleeding yeoman farmers, and was maintaining a non-industrial society, that as this occurs, the South loses complete power in the House. And by losing power in the House and losing power eventually in the Electoral College and the presidency, it had no hope of maintaining power in government other than in the Senate. There was all kinds of compromises attempting to maintain their power. But the biggest issue here was that the North utilizing their power, had a control on taxes and tariffs, right? Obviously, the Civil War was about slavery in many ways, but one of many issues was about taxation, and the concept that the federal government was reducing. The concept that the federal government was reducing in power is completely ahistorical, because what you see during the lead up to the Civil War are railroad companies working with and bought by northern congressmen and senators that are utilizing state power in the most corrupt ways to funnel taxes on imports that are crushing the southern economy, so that they can pat themselves on the back and create and use massively overpriced budgets of tax revenue to give towards railroad companies that were moving through, northern sections that were competing with a southern railroad, but the southern railroad was basically a middle America railroad, etc. So I just don't see the idea that the state was lessening in power as it was also increasing its stranglehold, and corruption was growing due to power imbalances that were set up in the structure itself. It doesn't make any sense to what you're saying.
Well, I appreciate the points you're making, but I feel like you're maybe talking a little past me, right? Because you're mentioning, okay, there was tariffs, but I did mention, right, from citing from the book, it said there was no federal inland taxes, right? So a tariffs wouldn't be considered inland taxes, but there was still no federal inland taxes, which is a huge difference.
It was a corruption
compared to what we have today.
We were doing tariffs, right? Because inland taxes would disproportionately affect those in power, which would be the northern industrial economy. And you had all of these northern senators and congressmen that owned beginning railroad companies and owned textiles. And they didn't want inland taxes. They wanted to reduce inland taxes because they would disproportionately affect the north. Whereas the vice versa was true with tariffs. Tariffs would disproportionately affect the South and would protect northern industry. So it's economic protectionism and corruption from the North as the government gets bigger. But your argument is the corruption itself is proof that the government was lessening and therefore good.
Well, yeah. I never went as far to say therefore good. Because it was lessening.
Fair. But that seemed to be the connection you were hinting at. I'll let you get to it. I'm sorry.
Well, I was going to mention also, you're mentioning the fact that, right, like America is a constitutional republic, but I think also, like, it's important to mention that also foundational to its system is federalism, which is maybe something we could agree on, right? Decentralization of power, right?
Anarchist, but I mean, like, yeah, sure. I have no problem with more localization as we transition to anarchy.
Well, I'm actually not in, like, I've considered myself a libertarian in the past, but I'm be upfront with my views. I am a conservative, and
there's no contradiction between conservative and libertarian or anarchist. You can be all three.
Well, I understand.
You are as a statist.
Well, no, I reject, like, libertarianism, its political philosophy, like, and classical liberalism, like,
sure, but right. I'm just saying, being a conservative doesn't mean that you have to be against libertarianism or anarchism, right? Like the Beachy Amish, the Mennonites, they're all extremely conservative, and yet they're pacifists and basically libertarian anarchists. Like they're all for every reduction of state power that can possibly exist, and they don't really care what anybody else says. They just want to govern themselves and their own community, and they only want a community of voluntary people because they don't want people there that don't follow their faith.
That's an important aspect of my perspective. Like, even though I might find disagreements with other people, I still try to find common ground with any perspective. And I do consider my perspective and my political views very bipartisan and populist, in that they're appealing to a wide range of political perspectives.
It's such a horrible word, right? Bipartisan usually means people are going to get killed.
Hold on. Just allow me to to explain what I mean when I say populist. In that, my views are appealing to a wide range of perspectives. Um, yeah, and
Well, yeah.
but
Well, that's not what
but
populism is, right? That's like not what populism is.
I think it's a fair use of the word. I think so. Um, but
Why would populist mean? Populist doesn't mean that it's appealing to a large group of people. That's not what populism is.
Okay. Maybe you're right. If maybe
It says popular.
if I can find the definition
Popular.
I'm looking for, maybe I'll send it to you. But I didn't get to speak more on my second point. Have you ever heard of the Austrian Economic Center? They have a website.
Yeah.
Okay, so they have an article. I have to. I should have looked it up before I talked to you, but it's called like localism and spontaneous government, something like that. And basically, they argue that it's possible, like considering spontaneous order and like and he speaks on Hayek and his theory of local knowledge, and also I believe they also mentioned Michael Polanyi, and basically they argue in that specific article that it is possible for there to be a spontaneous minimalist state, and also their view is that it would occur for like with
what is this an
beginning
argument
with
of?
Against, well, it's the fact that
You're kind of just saying random things.
It's the fact that it's coming from the Austrian Economic Center, and they argue
I don't care that a website hosted an article that claims that it's possible for localized governments to spontaneously spring up, at least based upon what you're saying. Yeah, and
also Douglas North, who's a very respected scholar of the Institutionalist School of Economics. He wrote a book called Violence and Social Orders, right? And in that book, he argues that like
stop quoting random fucking books and saying that people argue random things, right? You said you have a critique of libertarianism, and you're bouncing all over the place, and you're not giving me a concise thing that I can refute or speak about or elucidate my opinion on. Instead, what you're doing is you're kind of just saying like random things bouncing around. Like you believe that you have critiques of anarcho-capitalism or libertarianism, right? And that's fine. I would love to hear those critiques as arguments. If you want to reference an article or you want to reference an author, that's fine. But the author doesn't actually matter. What matters is the validity of the argument.
The reason why I moved on to a scholar and reference his book was because
I don't need you to justify it. I just need you to give me the argument of the critique.
Was because you pointed out that I cited an article, so that's why I did. But
yeah, no, I don't. When I critiqued you for citing some random article about some random thing that presumably I don't even disagree with, I wasn't critiquing you for bringing up an article, so please bring up a book. I was saying make a concise argument against libertarianism, and then I can deal with that argument in good faith.
So the argument from the article, right, which is what makes sense to me, that's why I'm using it, right? It is that it's that minimalist state, right? Kind of, I guess, similar to like Robert Nozick's argument, but they're following like in the steps of Hayek and Polanyi, right? And they argue that there can be a voluntary minimalist state, but through spontaneous order.
Okay. The argument that there can be a voluntary state is nonsensical, because the two terms from a libertarian perspective are antithetical to each other, right? Because if you want to talk about Hoppe and Nozick's notion that there can and often ought be covenant communities where people agree to come together in large sections and of purchase property and agree to some form of monopolistic controls within their voluntary system, that's not a state. Like that ceases to be a state as far as the libertarian perspective is concerned. The same way that like a corporation has governance, but it's not a state. And the reason it's not a state is because it's purely voluntary. And all of the land and all of the things are actually owned by individuals or a corporation which people have shares in, right? So there's no illegitimate ownership or collective ownership of property. Instead, there are voluntary contracts of which people use a form of governance that they agree upon. Like that's not a critique of libertarianism. That is libertarianism.
Well, I sent you the article if you'd like to look at it. It's called
I'm not going to read it right now. Like I'm live on stream, right?
All right. Well, I mean, those were the two main criticisms I wanted to discuss. I did also wanted just to mention also that my perspective is that similar to what you were discussing earlier, is that I believe in like the way forward is to have like a national conservative counter-cultural revolution.
I don't know what you mean by that. So like I don't know that I agree. Like cultural revolution historically usually ends in a lot of genocide, right?
Yeah,
so like I'm not sure I know what you mean by that.
Let me draw the distinction. So there was the Marxist cultural revolution, and we saw in like with the Soviet Union, right? It became a political.
It's usually referring
revolution.
to Mao, but yeah.
It became a political revolution outside of America, but in America it was a cultural revolution, and I'm referring to that, like that type of cultural revolution, like in America where there wasn't a political revolution, even though you could argue there was attempts, right? And that's kind of like with McCarthy,
okay.
Right?
Right, you're just saying that you need a shift in the culture.
Yeah,
not necessarily the cultural revolution as it is what you're.
Like a conservative,
historically.
a conservative a cultural revolution, countercultural revolution.
I'm less concerned with. I don't know that I agree with you that we need a conservative cultural revolution, because I don't know that all aspects of conservatism as a culture or a philosophy are things that I agree with. Right, like I think what we need is a libertarian individualist revolution. We need a revolution.
I completely disagree. My view is in local communal self-governance, and going back also to.
Well, you can't have local governance that's also self-governance, right? The two are contradictory.
Sorry?
You can't govern the self and then have a local government that governs the self, right? Like you can't, like that is conflict, like that can't exist. You can't have self-governance and local governance at the same time.
Well, I kind of see like centralized political institutions. Well, first of all, I think even in your like worldview, you still see centralization, right? But so centralization of power, right? Within but it. Okay,
that's a random claim, but okay. I mean, I disagree, obviously. I disagree that you would see like a central state authority of power under libertarianism, but okay.
Well, the point I was going to make is, well, of course there would be, right? Like you're not opposed to big business, right? And big business is definitely centralized power.
Yeah, I disagree. I think the state is what actually creates monopolistic tendencies in corporations more so than the corporations themselves, unless said corporation is an efficiency monopoly, and then it is almost certainly a good thing.
I agree. Rockefeller he reduced the price of oil continuously.
Yeah, like kerosene.
He didn't raise it like what is the monopolist claim? Where you lower your price?
Yeah, it was like $20 a barrel, and like towards the end it was like $4 and some change. And that's not even adjusting for inflation.
But that still means that he did have a centralized power and influence, right?
I mean, it depends. Like, you seem to be using a lot of words, and then when I say that's not true,
There exists
then you then just kind of go, "Oh, well, I have my own definition of my word."
Centralized powers and markets.
I think you're. I'm not sure that you understand most of the words that you're using. And I'm not trying to be insulting.
Wouldn't you? Wouldn't you agree that centralized powers and markets exist? Right. That's what allows for like globalization.
Okay, I would agree. I would agree that they do exist. That there is a tendency for that, but the issue there is the state. I wouldn't agree that it's the corporations itself that do it. I would say that corporations are, first of all, corporations
I wasn't
like the way they exist is a state. Okay, your argument was that there would be centralization under a libertarian worldview. I disagree.
Well, you said there can't be a local government, right?
I said that you can't have local governance and self-governance simultaneously because those are contradictory. You cannot govern the self and then have an entity that governs you above you.
Now I understand where the difference lies. So, when I use this term self-governance, I mean it in its historical, American cultural, and that's how I'm referring. That's how I'm using it. So in that being like, I guess
it's still wrong.
To use the modern libertarian term is, I guess you could call it anti-status.
But be anti-status and then be in a state like a system can't be anti-state and statist at the same time. These are contradictory.
Well, I'm not anti-state, but I am anti-statist.
Okay.
Right. Like I have.
No, you're not. If you're pro-state, you can't be anti-statist and be for the state.
If you're pro-minimalist state, or like objectivist or something, you're definitely more anti-statist than like the average leftist. I would think. Right.
Yeah. You're being against a larger government, or expansion of government or socialism doesn't make you anti-statist. It just makes you anti what those positions are.
Well, the point is basically trying to have independent communal power outside, as much as possible outside of the government, right? And be dependent as possible on each other locally and communally, rather than from centralized government.
Listen. I understand the concept, right? That you are a paleo-libertarian, in that you are, or a minarchist, if you will. Either one, doesn't matter. And I understand the concept that you believe in a night watchman state, presumably. Right? Correct me if I'm wrong. And the night watchman state is that, like, insofar that there might be a federal government, said federal government really should only be handling treaties, potentially like very, very limited in its tariff structure, if necessary, to not be the victim of trade wars, not to start them, but to be able to defend against them. And that like there might be like an FBI or something, to deal with pedophiles, so that like each local government doesn't have to fucking, somehow communicate, that there can be like a central institution that can help them catch the pedophiles that are moving from, one place to another on the internet. Like, right. Like that. But for the most part, the overwhelming majority of governmental decisions should be held by people within a much smaller geographical region, because those people know the region, know the community, know each other, and know the specific needs and desires of that community better than, let's say, people in DC or people in, Alaska. That seems to be what you're mostly in favor for. And I agree that is more libertarian in the small L sense, right? In the sense of like Hayek was a small L libertarian, right? In the sense that like there are a lot of people that believe, Friedmanites and things of that nature, believe in limited government. I grant you that, and I grant you that what it is that you desire is certainly closer to what I desire than what your typical Republican or your typical Democrat or socialist or almost any other political philosophy desires. I'm just saying that ultimately I'm an anarchist, and that self-governance and local governance are contradictory. Now, and that's it. Like that, that's just Those are two facts.
So I missed your last point. You said that like anarchy is necessary.
No, I mean, I said I'm an anarchist. I mean,
Yeah,
I don't know that it's necessary for what, you know what I mean? Like, it depends on what you mean by necessary. Like,
well, I would say your characterization, your representation of my views were pretty accurate. Like small government, limited government.
Yeah.
I've
met minarchists before.
I do like I think I said before. I do reject libertarianism, though. Like and that is part of my name, and also why I specified communal self-governance rather than individual self-governance. You did also mention something earlier about personal responsibility, right? And I would like to say, like that's something I've been thinking about. Like I believe personal responsibility and individual responsibility is very important. To be responsible, mature, productive person in society. But I think part of that personal responsibility is to be able to cooperate with others.
I don't disagree with that. Right? I think I think what is in man's rational self-interest is obviously going to be the ability to trade skills and to trade resources and to network with other individuals according to their strengths and weaknesses. So it's against your rational self-interest to be piss poor at being able to communicate and network with other individuals. Now, I don't think that you have an individual responsibility to doing so, because I don't think technically anybody has a moral duty or obligation to anybody else in anything, period.
No, that's a fair point. I guess I wasn't speaking in absolute terms. Like, of course, there would be context where
Yeah, I'm not trying to critique what you're saying. Like, please understand, I'm not trying to like shit on you constantly. What I'm trying to do is be precise with my words because I'm live, because people clip me, right? And because if I agree to something, that is like imprecise, people will be like, oh, you fucking said this. And it's like, that's not what I meant. Right. Like, so I get that I'm being autistic with a lot of these words. But it's important that I don't agree to, let's say, like, something like populism is good, because I understand that you mean popular and not the political philosophy of populism or something, right? Or any other of these other words, right? I'm a nerd about this shit, and I'm very specific about this shit, but also I have to be, or it'll be used against me.
Yeah, well, my point in pointing out the importance of cooperation was getting more towards like my perspective of like human nature is that I don't have an individualistic perspective of human nature.
Right, but is cooperation, and is it a skill, and is it beneficial when it's coerced?
I'm not.
What's more valuable? Sure. Uncoerced cooperation, or people that actually cooperate voluntarily?
I think we would agree that voluntary exchange is generally most likely preferable to coercion. Although, but there could be like some sort of like a communal or familial coercion that like it could be considered coercion, or maybe like duties and responsibilities that are socially pressured.
But social pressure is like, as an anarchist, I agree, social pressure. Right? But once you start talking about local governance in a minimal government, you're no longer talking about social pressure. Like, at a certain point, you're talking about using the violence of the state to enforce cooperation amongst people that don't desire to cooperate. Why do you think that is justified? To use the violence of the state to force people who don't like each other to cooperate in this presumed greater good?
I think like centralizing power is just at least from my understanding of our current how human society currently functions. I believe that centralization of power, and like when specifically when it comes to like a monopoly of force, is inherent part of our social human nature, or our sociological nature, right? And this is why I was referencing the book by Douglas North, because he argues that this centralized political power what was necessary in order to better manage conflict.
So here's the thing. Your claim is, it. First of all, it's an problem here. It's a naturalistic fallacy, because you're saying it's human nature that we desire that, therefore it is right to do that, which isn't a justification at all. It's a fallacious argument. But let's dig into it, even though it is fallacious. So I could just dismiss that as a non-argument and just throw it away anyways. But let's be as charitable as I can, right? Which is, I think, what you're attempting to communicate is that centralization of power is in man's best interest, because that is how man functions best. And my response to that argument is that there's no reason that if you believe that would happen sporadically, that people would voluntarily give that up, right? Then there is no reason for the state to coerce that behavior in the first place. If it is human nature that we prefer centralized authority, then the centralized authority would occur in a voluntary market. So the question then becomes is, well, why ought it be imposed, as opposed to people being freely able to choose their policing and governmental agencies and their rights enforcement agencies?
How I understand human nature is that, yes, we do have a moral nature, but in reality, though, might is right. And ultimately, it doesn't matter what political system you have. If there's another political system that is much more powerful and can overtake your system, ultimately, it doesn't matter, right? So
okay, so your argument now is might is right. So
no.
Is gang rape right?
That
couple that went to northern India where the woman got gang raped, right? And then they were like, we went to 66 countries and they were fine, and then we went to northern India and they gang raped me, and my husband, he got hit in the head and they had a knife to him, and he watched me get gang raped. Was it morally right for those Indians to rape that woman?
No, my argument is that centralized centralized government is in the interest of the people, and which is why they formed, because they cancel out might is right.
You're being contradictory.
The rule of law.
You're being contradictory, right? So you believe it's wrong to gang rape, right?
I just want to be able to finish every point, just so I could fully explain myself. Can I continue?
You're good, brother. You're good. Go ahead.
So my follow-up point I want to make is that so
don't let the silence breathe too long, brother. I'm letting you go.
So my argument is that what I see everything. Maybe we could agree on this. I see everything from a bottom-up perspective. And this is why I admire the core American political system, because it is a bottom up political system, and this is why Tocqueville referred to it as egalitarian, right? Because politics begins locally and then moves to the state and then to the federal level, and this is why I was mentioning why the government was stable and there wasn't out of control debt and inland taxes, and so I believe that if a local government is formed by a community, right? But I understand that there's some research into like that there has been some anarchist societies, right? Like
you're not answering my question.
So I'm just allow me to continue. I'm gonna make my point. So as a conservative, I believe that, like, from what we understand of history, the centralized political state has functioned to a certain degree that it has allowed civilization, and it has allowed civilizations, right? And it has allowed us to get to the point where we are now with the Industrial Revolution, and and you you get what I'm saying, right?
So, can you hear me? Because you were breaking up a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay, there we go. So here's what I would say. If I were to steelman your argument, right? Your mic is making a bunch of noise. All right. So if I was to steelman your argument, what it sounds like your argument is, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that civilization historically has moved towards a sense of property rights, a sense of individual liberty, and a sense of liberal democracies away from less superior forms of governance. And the reason it has done so is because there is a kind of like a cost associated with maintaining order. And that if people are too unhappy with that maintained order, then that cost becomes higher. And so over time, as we've gained in power, that these systems have gone, and that there was a certain period of time where the power of the state or technology or whatever shifted in a different direction. And then there was a peak kind of in the early 1800s America, where that power was balanced in an appropriate way. You want to return to that, and that return is this balance between the necessary elements of the federal state and the necessary elements of the localized state. And the reason these elements are necessary is that outside forces of nation states can see a weak enemy, or that the law of the jungle is the natural kind of position of humanity, and that there isn't some level of governance that imposes some order upon the chaos, then regardless of the costs of imposing that order, the outside pressures will be worse, and that they will take over in some capacity. So that there's might doesn't necessarily make right, but might makes reality, and therefore we ought use might as little as possible while still being able to maintain order. And the best way to maintain order is to have the most localized form of government possible, because that is a form of government that is as close to the desires and the will of the people that live in that community, that necessarily must be controlled to some degree, because if left to go rampant and wild, they would just do dumb anarchistic shit to each other and then get taken over. Is that a fair approximation of your beliefs?
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair. That was a good clarification of my position.
My argument against that is that there's baked into this an assumption of an efficiency of the state, whilst also recognizing the inefficiencies of the state. I don't disagree with the concept that might makes reality, but I do disagree with the concept that might makes right, which is not really what I think you meant, right? I think what you meant is just that without state power, there is, like, it gets taken over. I have a video. I think you've probably, if you said you've been I have a video on how anarchism can defend itself. There's a bunch of arguments in there. It's an older video. My theory isn't that great, but if you haven't seen it, I don't know, check it out. Tell me what you think. Or don't, it's fine. What I would say is that what that argument entails is an understanding that imposing order costs. It costs the societal progress. It costs due to the local knowledge problem that Hayek himself, as you've mentioned that several times, right? Which is that centralization of power, just like centralization of the economy, faces the local knowledge problem, and moving further into Mises, the economic calculation problem. And that this is not just true of taxes or price controls or things like that, but this is also true of governance. And that what occurs is there will always be that the state's imposition, even if local, even if better, will still lack knowledge and lack controls that the price mechanism would have. And that the anarchistic community would be more efficient. And as you mentioned previously, there would even be spontaneous growths of what one might call small localized governments that would work together with treaties and things like that in defense of alliances and pacts. And so I think that there is a presumed kind of like necessity of the state that the logic even of that argument already defeats. That the state isn't necessary for any of those elements.
I just wanted to say I appreciated the conversation. You've been very civil and you've given me a lot of good responses to think over. But I actually didn't think I was gonna be on here for that long. So I think I'm gonna get going now. But like I said, I really appreciated the conversation and you being willing to speak with me.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I was just kind of an impromptu thing, anyways. I gotta get out of here soon too and eat some dinner and prep for tomorrow with Jack Lloyd. Hope everybody will be there. Because, you know, we'll really get into this open borders versus closed borders position. And I think you personally will probably like it, the minarchist that you are, watching the anarchists try and defend closed borders. Peace. Okay, all right, well, bye.